Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our daily word, our ongoing conversation about Scripture and its pull on us, its desire to help us live good lives and to recognize God in us. This is daily word number 622. So I'm glad you could join me for our time together today. Thanks for carving out some time in your schedule as you do every day, whether it's now or later or even a couple days from now, to just connect with us. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for saying good morning or good afternoon when you watch and let me know that you're here. I do appreciate that as well. So we continue our ongoing journey this morning through Scripture, and I have just this one verse, but of course it's told in a bigger context, and we'll talk a bit about that. But first, this one verse from Luke chapter 5, verse 4. When he had finished teaching them, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Now, this is the calling of the disciples, and Jesus is teaching, as Luke tells us, on the shore of Lake Gennesaret. And he's teaching the crowds who will listen. And you must guess probably that these fishermen aren't far off the shore and probably hear Jesus' teaching to them. And so Jesus gets done and he asks the question, "Have you caught anything?" And Simon says, "Look, we've been fishing all night and we haven't even caught," depending on what translation you use, but I read early this morning for the Message version, Peter said, "We haven't even caught a minnow." And Jesus says, "Look, put your nets out into the deep water, cast them on the other side, let your nets down for a catch." And Simon's response was, "Look, we're tired. We've been fishing all night. We haven't caught anything. But Master," he calls him Master, interestingly enough, "if you say so, we'll do it." And of course, they cast their nets. They have a huge catch of fish. And then Jesus invites them to come and follow. And the scripture says to us that they put down their nets and they follow Jesus and become those disciples that we come to know so well. We have this interesting conversation that happens. Jesus, as he encounters these disciples and encounters others along this long journey of his life, we hear Jesus invite people of all kinds of diverse circumstances to be sent out to serve others. Now, sometimes we know that Jesus heals someone and says, "Don't tell anybody," but we know that they told someone. They had to, because the people had to notice, that their life had been forever changed. The disciples here, the fishermen, hear Jesus' teaching, are exposed to who he's about. They listen, and then they go and follow. Now, this initial call story for them is probably one of these huge mountaintop experiences, because for some reason they leave their nets full of fish and their dads and their brothers and their mothers and they go and follow because Jesus asks them to cast their nets into deeper water. Not into the shallow circumstances that they might already know, but into deeper water. I got to thinking about that as we live our lives, that we're probably most comfortable. I know I am a lot of times, but we're most comfortable when we are in the recognized, shallow, comfortable places, even if we don't have a catch. Because it's there that, we find stability. It's there that we have perceived safety, right? We too like to live in those places, but Jesus asks us, as he asked those early fishermen in the 5th chapter of Luke, to cast their nets into deep water to provide a catch. You know, that's what we're called to in our lives. We're called to live deeper. We're called to cast our nets deeper. That means engaging with each other. That means studying with each other. That means loving our neighbors. That means, sharing what we have with other people. That's knowing that God's going to meet us right where we are as we cast those deep nets. Because you see, here's the thing. We are not just consumers of God's love. We're just not consumers of God's word. We're just not consumers of God's blessings upon us. We are participants in it. And God's calling us to cast our lives into deep water, to make deep commitments in our faith, about sharing our lives with each other. We really can't refuse to cast our nets. We have to share them and cast them deeper and deeper. We're called to serve as Jesus called the disciples, early disciples, and others to serve. We don't get to live on the mountaintop. We get the privilege. We get the call to cast our nets into deep water. And if we do that, if we decide to dive deeper into our faith and to study together, we do that. So tonight, tonight is my confirmation gathering with my 4 confirmation kids. And we'll gather for prayer and food. And we're going to talk about Scripture tonight. And this is just an initial kind of invitation for them. Because what we're really hoping is that somehow, excuse me, in our lives together, we'll go deeper. And our faith will be enriched, and we'll find meaning where we haven't found it before. And that happens tonight at choir practice. Look, folks, you come to choir practice, and you find that deeper connection to God through song and through what Therese invites us to do. That's an amazing gift when we gather today and we gather for worship on Sunday morning. And pretty soon when we gather for our Advent Wednesday nights, we gather to go deeper, to cast our nets into deep water. I invite you to leave the comfortable, shallow places of your lives and to cast your nets into deeper water as Jesus invited those early fishermen. And maybe, just maybe, our lives will be enriched by that and changed by that. Sorry for my words. Be enriched and changed and will grow because of that. Simon said, man, we're tired. We haven't caught anything, not even a minnow. But he accepts the invitation to cast nets into deeper water. And that's what we are called to. So I hope that's a good word that we might have the courage to do today, to cast our nets into deep water. I'm trusting that God is going to move in us and to be reminded that we're not consumers only, but we're participants in what God's offering us and that we're called to share it with others. So thanks for joining me today. Know of God's love and know of my love for you. And I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day.